environment now that people in this country have been getting poorer. And that is an indictment of this government. Previously, I have discussed the housing crisis several times and what exactly is causing it. And we know that it's not just down to just one thing. There are many factors involved with this. Ultimately, now, over the last year or so, so many people have been struggling with high interest rates. And the Bank of England acted negligently. They took too long to act to nip inflation in the bud, which was not caused by the people in this country. The inflation that we've had is called push inflation. It is from sources, causes beyond our shores. And yet, they put interest rates up so many times, and even though they are throttling this country, they still refuse to lower interest rates, which they should have done. I was calling for this months ago, but they have actually not done anything to improve things for people. Sorry? Is my battery going? You couldn't hear me, I'm so sorry. Do I need to repeat myself? This is going to keep me talking for longer. Ultimately, it is everyday people who are being punished for the mistakes of the Bank of England. And the Bank of England does have a lot to answer for, because many people are not aware that before that disastrous budget by Liz Truss, the night before, they were actually undermining the government by selling bonds. They started a run on our economy the night before the budget. It was, without doubt, reckless to have just released so many changes in one budget, especially as we have the disastrous OBS, who's always wrong, but ultimately it is used by the hierarchy to actually control government to their particular narrative. And that has been disastrous, and everyday people have been paying ever since. And as I've said before, touching on housing, nothing to do with housing has been addressed for such a long time. The papers have mentioned it. Throughout last year, we have had the usual media misinformation, as you are fully aware. And sometimes I see it, and it would be laughable if it wasn't so tragic, because the media, people within the industry, Rightmove, Zoopla, anybody connected with the property market, and most estate agents as well, excluding myself, rotten to the core. Throughout last year, I was saying to everybody who was buying a new property with a small deposit, do not buy now. No matter what they are telling you, they're lying to you. The pressure on property is downwards. If you buy now, you'll be signing up to 4 or 5 years of negative equity. And young people don't remember what it was like in the early 90s, but it was horrid, because life has surprises. You don't know what you may need to do next year. What happens if you have a ball and chain around your neck, which is a property that's worth less than you owe? And these people have blood on their hands for all those who bought through last year. We had Rightmove, which produces their market update. It's not a market update. They just deal with the figures of property that have come to market this month. And if property, out of the amount of property that's being sold, if the cheapest 2 or 3% or 5% of property sells, what happens to the average price? The average price then goes up. So they then say the average price of property has gone up, but it hasn't, it's falling. And then they use these wonderful terms, property's going to bounce back. It will not bounce back. It's falling, it continues to fall, and it will continue to fall for a while because so many people are in arrears and they are increasing month on month. They've attacked private landlords and made them public enemy number one. Landlords are not public enemy number one. They're not all perfect, but where there are errors, where there are irregularities, that's down to the government not enforcing proper rules and regulations from day one. The government has done nothing to help an entire generation that we have failed who cannot get onto the property ladder. Is it any wonder that our birth rate is falling? How are people supposed to have a family if they can't even buy a home? Which is why my catchphrase from the last time was and continues to be, we must help young people. We must do all that we can to ensure that they can get onto the property ladder so that they can get a home, so that they can make a family, because I believe in procreation, not immigration. But nothing at all has been done to address this. It's not even been mentioned through the election. It's not been mentioned in their policy. It wasn't mentioned in the budget because they just don't care. And as you've seen, all of us who stand here on behalf of reform are everyday people who have just had enough. We're not career politicians. We're not here to earn ourselves an invite to dinner parties in Islington. We are going to prove that the quality required to serve the public is not scholarship at Eton followed by an exit party involving inappropriate behaviour with barnyard animals, but actually everyday people who understand everyday life and are standing because they believe in something, and they stand for something and stand against something, because we're at the point now where you either stand for something or you don't stand for anything at all. And now is the time that we need to stand against everything that is happening to us, because as our good friend and the voice of reform, Mr. Farage, says, it is not long before we will be seen voting along sectarian lines in this country. Just in the last year, we have seen things that we never expected to see in this country. We have seen Parliament bullied, candidates bullied. At the by-elections, we saw the atrocious behaviour of some of the councillors who have used the Green Party to sneak into power. This is not just a one-off. This is a strategy, and we're going to see it again through this election. And I dread to think what spectacles are awaiting us on election night. That remains to be seen. Ultimately, we have to get the word across to people. We are all standing independently to do the best that we can to win our seats. And at the moment, the way that it's going, more and more people are supporting reform, but they're supporting reform quietly, because ultimately we are in a political narrative now where if we're told that that sausage roll identifies as an egg and we dispute that, we are far right. It wouldn't be so funny if it wasn't so terrifying. And anyone who realises what the implications are should be most terrified at what could happen if and when the tide turns. I'd also like to just touch quickly on net zero and what exactly that means. Sorry, as in net zero migration and what exactly that means. Because they use this net migration to, if you like, muddy the waters and confuse people. Last year, 1.4 million people arrived in this country, and they are saying net migration was 675,000? But then having said that, the year before they revised it upwards twice. So it will still end up more than likely more than last year. 500,000 people on average leave this country every year. So if we had a net migration of 0, that means 500,000 people who were not born here arrive in this country in a year. In a decade, that's 5 million. With members of family that they bring and their children, 10 or 15 million. If it's smart immigration, that's fine. But if they're people who come here entitled with an agenda to change our country, to change our culture, to change our laws, then that is unacceptable. There's a date, a very important date, that should be in the mind of every woman of the United Kingdom. And that date is the 18th of August, 1882. Does anybody know what that date represents? The 18th of August, 1882 is the day that the Married Women's Act was passed. And for the first time in British history, women were no longer the chattels of their husbands. For in terms of our society, our culture, our moral compass, that is huge. It took another 4 decades almost before women could vote. A further decade before they could vote on equal terms, and 3 or 4 more decades before we had the Equality Act. You would think that would be mission accomplished, but it wasn't, because in recent years we have begun to regress. And I am seeing a culture and a mindset being imported into this country that is imposing the threat of a culture of misogyny not seen in this country since the Vikings. And I cannot believe that many of the people who are making excuses for them are women. I came across this date, I had come across it in the past, but I came across it randomly about 18 months ago, and I made a point of looking out for it on the 18th of August last year, just to see what would be written about it in the paper. Because as I see it, that is the moral and the women's equivalent of the 4th of July, or it should be. There was nothing. Not even in The Guardian. I found an article about some beast who used the wrong pronoun and was forbidden from teaching for the rest of his life because he was such a hideous person because he used the wrong pronoun. Well, I'm sorry, I don't care whether they like it or not. There are only 2 genders. And if I had a child in school who was told that they could identify as anything they want or identify as a cat, then my child would be out of that school faster than you could say vote reform. Anyway, I would like to close by thanking the other candidates, Anthony, Scott, Edward, and Paul, and of course Ben, who is our champion. We're going to be fighting very, very hard for Northamptonshire, but we're also going to be supporting all of our surrounding candidates from Leicestershire and everywhere else, because we're all on the same page and we're all fighting to stop this rot that is taking over our country and to stand for what is right. And ultimately, for those of us who, in reality, live such wonderful lives in this country, because it is the best place to be in the world, have a huge debt to repay, and we owe it to this country to stand up for everything that it has given to us, but more importantly, we owe it to the generation who are living their lives suffering from climate anxiety because people like Ed Miliband are convincing them that the world's going to end tomorrow. It's all right if you pay tax, that will change the weather. That's fine. And if you pay tax, you can drive into London and pollute as much as you want and millions of babies won't die anymore. Absolute rubbish. We need to focus on these young people, because ultimately it's not the money, it's not the building, it's not the roads that is basically our national treasure. It is our young people. I know there can be testing, and I know they love to protest about ridiculous things, but even though you're obviously far too young to remember, it was the same in the flower power days, wasn't it exactly the same thing? But regardless, we need to focus not just on helping them, but also protecting them from predators, people who are out to brainwash them, and people who are out to hijack and destroy their heritage, which is the United Kingdom. Thank you very much.